Freedom Rides, Exploring the Road to Equality,
Encountering Hate,
Exchanging Jim Crow for Freedom,
by Allie Studding
and Allie Watkins.
1960. In the Jim Crow-infested, segregated, and hate-filled South, African Americans lived as second-class citizens. Slow acceptance of every civil rights legislation and achievement made it difficult for the civil rights movement to move forward. Example:
The 1954 Brown versus Board of Education decision desegregated public schools.
But with the inclusion of the phrase, "with all deliberate speed," freedom remained a dream.
February 1st, 1960, a lunch counter sit-in at Greensboro, North Carolina, stood as the groundwork for a resurgence of efforts to move civil rights forward.
But the arrests and brutal attacks of over 1,500 sit-in students did not change Jim Crow laws. Freedom remained a dream.
The social aspect of segregation,
Discrimination and hate were pervasive.
Jim Crow was alive and well in the South. The 1960 Supreme Court ruling of Boynton versus Virginia made denial of interstate travel because of someone's color illegal. But it took a group of racially integrated individuals,
The Freedom Riders, to bring about attention to the horrific conditions in the South, as well as to dare the federal government to carry out their legal obligations.
The Jim Crow culture violently confronted the Freedom Riders with attacks by the Ku Klux Klan, racist citizens, and white authority.
In early 1961, the Congress of Racial Equality, CORE, sponsored the Freedom Riders. James Farmer, president of CORE, began recruiting riders from across the nation, black, white, men, and women, to begin exploring for their rights. Meet Genevieve Hughes Houghton, a white Freedom Rider from the South.
I am one of 2 white women of the original 13 Freedom Riders. I figured Southern women should be represented so that the South and the nation would realize that all Southern people don't think alike. Before the rides, we had to be trained. Nonviolence was key. We would not respond with physical encounter. A training session went something like this. I'd like a cup of coffee, please.
Now, I don't want any of your kind in here. You and your sympathizing with those Negroes. You're a disgrace to the white race.
I'd like a cup of coffee, please.
You know, you can move. You can go sit with your Negro friends in the back.
I don't move when I'm in the ride.
Now, who do you think you are?
My name is Genevieve, and I'm an interstate traveler.
And where are you from?
Well, I'm from the United States. After months of training, the Freedom Riders were ready to begin. On May 4th, they departed on a Trailways bus and a Greyhound bus from Washington, D.C., intending to reach New Orleans on May 17th to celebrate the 7th anniversary of the Brown versus Board decision.
May 8th, 1961, the Freedom Riders arrive in Rock Hill, South Carolina. This is the first city in which the Freedom Riders would encounter violence.
No, please! Please remain peaceful, please! Oh God, John, Albert, please stop hurting them!
John Lewis, Albert Bigelow, and Genevieve Houghton were beaten.
After our stop in Rock Hill, we knew this was real. Rock Hill, our ride, our exploration of the Deep South was gaining media attention, and that's when I realized something. You gotta get hurt for it to make it to the news.
May 14th, 1961, the Freedom Riders Greyhound bus arrives in Anniston, Alabama. Local Ku Klux Klan leader Kenneth Adams found out about the Freedom Riders' arrival and organized a hostile encounter.
I looked out the window to see a mob of 200 angry white, racist citizens.
Klansmen, filled with hate in our hearts, carrying knives, pipes, bricks, and chains in our hands.
We couldn't stop at this terminal. The threat was too high.
And so that bus took off. But we followed. We followed for 6 miles.
They're throwing stones at the windows and the sides of the bus.
Members from this mob were able to...
They're slashing the back 2 tires.
And the bus stopped.
And so did my heart. As we tried to protect ourselves from those trying to get inside, I heard someone yell, "Bomb!" Smoke filled the air in my lungs, and I thought, oh my God, they're gonna burn us up. Somehow I found myself off the bus and on the ground, but I can't tell you if I walked off that bus or if I crawled off or if someone pulled me up. Water. Someone give me water.
Ma'am, you all right? Glad to hear. Although the Greyhound bus was stopped in Anniston, the Freedom Riders Trailways bus was able to escape on to Birmingham, Alabama, a city synonymous with hate and racism. Police Commissioner of Public Safety Bull Connor found out about the Freedom Riders' arrival and instructed the police force to hold off for 15 minutes, while the KKK left the riders bloody and battered.
The FBI was fully aware of the violence in Birmingham and Anniston before it took place, yet they did nothing. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover, notorious for his white supremacist leanings, refrained from telling Attorney General Robert Kennedy of the violent encounters. After these encounters, newspapers, radio broadcasts, and news stations entered homes across America.
They knocked one man, a white man, down at my feet, And they beat him and they kicked him until his face was a bloody red pulp. The police did not arrive until 15 minutes late, when the men had, if on signal, dispersed and gone further down the street, where I saw some of them discussing their achievements of the day, right underneath the windows of the police commissioner's office.
For the Kennedy brothers, the Freedom Ride stood as an afterthought and a nuisance during the Cold War era. President John F. Kennedy was quoted complaining to Harris Wofford, Justice Department official involved in the Civil Rights Movement.
Can't you get your goddamn friends off them buses? Stop them!
Our friends and allies were appalled that this was taking place in the United States. America was not living up to its promise of liberty and justice for all.
After the brutal attacks in Birmingham and Anniston, 9 out of the 13 Freedom Riders were hospitalized. James Peck suffered a crack to the head, resulting in 53 stitches. The riders who were hospitalized in Anniston were able to move on to Birmingham that next day. Genevieve Houghton visited James Peck in the hospital that next morning. Genevieve, we have to continue the rides. We must not surrender to violence.
James, I am no longer this fearless rider. We are no longer these fearless riders. Don't you appreciate being alive?
Well, yes, but don't you see what we're doing? People know who we are. We're on the TV.
James, there's no more bus drivers willing to finish the rides with us. We already have a flight scheduled to New Orleans, and we leave tomorrow. Wouldn't you be rather blown up in a plane than be beaten to death?
After that day, the rides discontinued on May 15th, when the Freedom Riders arrived in New Orleans by plane, and the rides came to a stop. However, activists within the National Student Movement did not want to see the rides discontinue. Diane Nash, one of National Student Movement's most respected and effective leaders, knew that the rides were necessary.
It was clear to me that if the rides were stopped at that point, just after so much violence had been inflicted, that the message would have been sent that all you need to do to stop a nonviolent campaign is inflict massive violence.
And so the National Student Ride began. 21 volunteers, including Diane Nash and John Lewis, departed from Nashville, Tennessee, and made their way for Montgomery, Alabama. This fresh group of riders would soon encounter the largest mob yet.
This is odd. Where is everyone?
I don't know, but I don't have a good feeling about this.
Maybe they got the message. Maybe things have changed.
Do you see that? Do you see those men? They're beating up on that photographer.
And that one too. All the reporters are being beaten and they're smashing their cameras on the ground.
There must be 100 of them. They keep coming out of nowhere. Bus driver, stop!
I bet there are 300 and women and children too.
They're coming for the bus, Diane. They're coming for the bus. Baseball bats, pipes? That man's even got a pitchfork.
Everyone start praying and remember to stay nonviolent. We have to brace ourselves.
The attack that day was a violent mob of 300 against a nonviolent group of 21. Police stood by, watched the violence, and did nothing. The Kennedy brothers were now dissatisfied with Southern local law enforcement and consequently sent 400 U.S. Marshals to enter into the city of Montgomery, Alabama. This fresh group of riders, John Patterson, governor of Alabama, opposed U.S. Marshals entering into the city.
We don't need the federal marshals here in this city. If the outside agitators that came in here and deliberately stirred up this controversy would go home, and the marshals would go home, it would be best for everybody and the situation would return to normal very quickly.
However, the riders were dedicated to this cause. They would take the harassments. They would take the beatings. They would even take death. The riders were going to keep riding until anybody could ride anywhere they wanted in the South.
June of 1961, the rides continued. Hundreds of people from across the U.S. were joining this exploration for equal rights, riding buses in order to fill Southern jails. Many riders were forced into Mississippi's infamous Parchman Penitentiary, where they experienced dehumanizing conditions and torture.
Through integrated exploration, violent and vicious encounters, and the exchange of Jim Crow for freedom, the coalition of the 436 Freedom Riders opened the doors to a racist, hate-filled, segregated South. In August of 1961, the Freedom Rides came to a stop, as activists waited for a federal government ruling on interstate travel. September 22, 1961, the Interstate Commerce Commission outlawed segregation of all interstate transportation in the United States.
The Freedom Riders' exploration challenging the Jim Crow laws of interstate travel paved the road to a resurgence of action in the Civil Rights Movement.
The Freedom Riders persevered until Jim Crow was exchanged for freedom. Thank you.